So the first session is what's the impact of health on retirement decisions? And we have 3 papers. The first paper is by Pamela Giustinelli of Bocconi University, and her discussant is going to be Deb Dwyer. So Pam, yeah, great. Did I mess up your name?
No, that was perfect.
Okay, thank you.
So how do I move to this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. This is joint work with Matthew Shapiro at the University of Michigan. We are very grateful to the Social Security Administration for funding this project. So the solvency of the US Social Security program is challenged by projected costs exceeding revenues. The proposal of increasing retirement age in order to work, it requires that workers have the health capacity to work longer. In this project, we quantify the causal effect of health on work, and we provide a novel strategy to simulate the effect of hypothetical changes to the health distribution of older workers on the population's labor supply forecast at specified horizons. In particular, we ask 4 sets of questions. The first question is, given currently healthy older workers, will they have the capacity, the health capacity to work in 2 and 4 years? The second question is, will this group of workers actually work in 2 and 4 years? The third question is, how large is the effect, the causal effect of health on work for this group of workers? And the fourth question is about using the estimates from point number 3 to simulate population-level forecast of labor supply in 2 and 4 years, if the probability that these workers did enter low health were reduced by half. So how do we answer these questions? We use novel survey data about work and health expectations of a sample of healthy older workers participating in the Vanguard Research Initiative, which I will call VRI for short. In the 2015 administration of the VRI, these respondents were asked their perceived likelihood on a scale between 0 and 100% that they will be working to specified horizons, 2 and 4 years in particular, under alternative health scenarios that we specify for them, and which eventually we collapse down into 2 main categories, high and low. In addition, these respondents reported their perceived likelihood of working to those horizons and of entering those health states. So this is just to show you how these questions looked like on the survey instruments, in fact, on the computer screen, because this survey was web-based. And so again, the 3 key measures are the unconditional probability of working, the unconditional probability of health, and then the conditional probability of working given the specified health states. Before I show you the results from the analysis, let me tell you a little bit more about the VRI and about our analytic sample. So the VRI is a survey administrative linked data set on older wealth holders. Respondents are account holders at Vanguard who have at least 10K in financial assets with Vanguard. They are aged 55 and over and are web-based eligible. Approximately 3,000 respondents as of December of 2015 had completed 4 surveys within the Vanguard Research Initiative, each on a different aspects of retirement decision-making, including wealth, long-term care, transfers, and labor. So our analysis today focuses on the 4th survey, which includes the key measures that I mentioned earlier, but we use variables from all 4 surveys. So in terms of our analytic sample, we do not use all participants in the Vanguard Research Initiative. We focus on respondents who were working at the time of survey 4. And this is about 1/3 of the original sample. On top of that, we require that these individuals took all 4 surveys, because we use data variables from all surveys. We require that they gave complete and consistent responses to all the relevant questions. And on top of that, we focus on respondents who reported being in high health at the time of survey 4. This is mainly due to the fact that less than 3% of working respondents at survey 4 reported being in low health, meaning being in fair or poor health. And so given these criteria, we were left with 2 analytic samples, one for the 2-year analysis and one for the 4-year analysis. Today I'm going to talk about the 4-year analysis only. The sample size is slightly smaller because it's conditional on individuals who reported a strictly positive probability of working in 2 years. Okay, so remember the 4 questions I introduced a couple of slides ago. So the first question was, will this group of workers have the capacity to work in 4 years? So to answer these questions, we use the answers to the health expectations question in our survey by our respondents to come up with aggregate level estimates of the proportions of individuals who will remain in high health in 4 years and the proportion of those who are projected to enter low health in 4 years. And based on our expectations measure, we project 76% of workers remaining in high health and 24% of workers entering in low health. Remember that these individuals are working at the time of the survey and are in high health. In terms of the second question, we adopt a similar strategy, which is we use responses to the unconditional working expectations questions to form estimates of the population labor supply in 4 years. And we get an estimate of 53% of individuals who would still be working in 4 years and 47% of individuals currently working in high health who would not be working in 4 years. The third pie chart uses both conditional and unconditional expectations data to show you estimates of the joint distribution of health and labor supply for these workers. Which should convey the idea that according to the subjective expectations of these individuals, there is a relationship indeed between work and labor and health. The question though is how big is this relationship? What's the size of this relationship? Which leads us to our third question, if you remember the list. And to answer this question, we use 2 key measures from our survey. The first measure is the probability that, given a certain individual in our sample, in our group, it's the probability that this person will work if they remain in high health. The second key measure is the probability that the same individual will work in the counterfactual scenario in which that person actually enters low health. Obviously, if you think about it ex post, we will always only be able to observe one of the 2 health states and the associated labor supply outcome. Ex ante, however, both of these possibilities are in principle possible, and so we actually measure them, both of them, for each individual in our sample by asking their ex ante probability of entering those states, and their ex ante probability of working were they to enter each of the 2 states. And so the first measure here, the key measure, is the probability that they work if they remain in high health. We have one of these measures for each person in our sample. What I'm showing in this slide is, again, the aggregate projections of labor supply if everyone were to remain in high health. As you can see, the projected proportion of working individuals is going up to 59% from 53% we saw earlier. In the alternative counterfactual world in which everyone were to actually enter low health, the projected proportion of individuals working decreases dramatically to 33%. So, as I said before, we define the subjective ex-ante treatment effect at the individual level as the difference between the probability that the individual will work if they enter low health, because we think of low health as kind of the treatment here. These people are in high health right now. So entering low health is actually a negative shock for them, whereas remaining in high health is basically their status quo situation. We define the treatment effect to be the difference between these two variables at the individual level, and in the paper we actually document the distribution of subjective treatment effects and analyze this distribution. In this slide, what I'm showing is an aggregate measure. It's like a feature of this distribution, which is the average across all individuals in the sample of their SATE, of their treatment effect. It turns out that about 1/3 of the respondents gave the same answer to the two questions, which implies a treatment effect of 0. And 2/3 of the respondents gave a higher probability of working if in high health than if in low health, which implies a strictly negative SATE, given how we define the SATE. And here what I'm showing is the absolute value of the average of this distribution, which is equal to 26 percentage points, which means that if we move people from being in high health to entering low health, on average, their chances of working in 4 years would go down by 26 percentage points. Finally, we use our estimates to simulate a world where, say, thanks to medical advances or other ways, we are able to reduce the baseline probability that our workers end up in low health in 4 years by half, which means at the aggregate level that we would move from a status quo scenario in which we project 24% of them being in low health to a counterfactual or hypothetical scenario where only 12% of them would enter low health. Under this scenario, the implication of this would be an increase in the projected proportion of people working in 4 years of 3%. That is an increase from 53% I showed earlier to a 56%, which is what we project under this hypothetical scenario. So to wrap up, we find an effect of health on work which is kind of, we think, economically sizable, but definitely not only a fraction of what determines health. Put it differently, our SATE estimates, we think of them as fairly large, but at the same time we notice that at least for our sample of workers, they expect to retire before the risk of bad health gets really high for them. We will be able to extend our method to quantify the importance of other determinants of labor supply, as well as to unpack a little bit better the different mechanisms through which health might operate. In addition, right now we are working on structural modeling, and in particular we are using our measures from the conditional expectations questions as direct measure of conditional probabilities generated by a model, a dynamic model of labor supply behavior. Finally, we have been working at collecting additional data, and in particular, later in 2017, there is going to be a new wave of the VRI, where we are going to be able to observe realizations of both health and labor supply for these individuals. We are going to be able to repeat our questions, the same questions again after 2 years. Notice that the 2 years question now are going to be an updated version of the 4-year questions we asked in 2015, and we are going to be able to add additional conditional expectations questions to get at additional, determinants of labor supply, how health operates, and so on and so forth. On top of this, in 2016, we were able to get this battery of questions, the ones I discussed today, in an experimental module of the health retirement study. So when the data become available, which we hope very soon, we'll be able to replicate this analysis on a sample of individuals, definitely more representative and varied of the older US population. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion.